Good morning, everyone. I'm Steve Nicklin, Senior Vice President of Marketing Analytics, and I'm pleased to welcome you to today's webinar on the second phase of work that we've done this year with Benchmarketing on media mix optimization. Before we begin, a few quick housekeeping topics. We do welcome your questions throughout the webinar. Please feel free to submit them using the Zoom question function. If we don't get to your question, we will do our best to follow up with you individually after the webinar. And then all of our webinars, of course, are featured on our website in the webinar library, which you can access from the News and Events tab, which is at the top of our website page, homepage. The summary content from today's presentation, along with the full analysis reports on sales, ROI, and brand metrics, including supporting infographics, the white paper that we've done on this study, and also a Q&A document that I think you'll find very helpful and informative. Those are all already posted on our website. And to navigate to those, you want to go to the Resource Center tab, also at the top of our homepage, and then select the Marketing Research section. That's where you'll find in the first entry all of those materials. And then later today, Diksha will also be posting a recording of today's webinar. So we're very pleased today to be joined by our panel of experts. Karin Baatsch-Deboulet, the EVP of US Operations for GroupM Out of Home, and also from Benchmarketing, who did all this amazing work for us, Sally Dickerson, their managing partner, and Vanda Wilshire, their executive director. Karin, along with Mark Costa, has served as co-chair of our OAAA Out of Home MMM and Attribution Working Group for the past several years. And they were instrumental in generating the modeling best practices that we released almost 3 years ago. We're immensely grateful for their time and expertise to our ongoing mission of showcasing the value and effectiveness of out of home from a performance measurement perspective. I'm going to ask Karin to share her very valuable agency-side perspectives on this analysis, but I first want to stress a few key points from both phases of this year's benchmarking work. Number one, these studies were undertaken with the goal of helping brands and agencies examine ways to optimize their overall media mix. So while there was a dedicated focus on out of home, it also incorporated digital, TV, radio, and print. The analyses were based on improving existing plans without adding any additional media budget, which I think is a really important point. And the way we accomplished this was by examining whether specific channels were being overspent. And if so, then to reallocate those funds to channels which were not yet optimized. The findings showed that out of home was underallocated across the board, so media plans were not being optimized, and that typically it was digital and TV that were being overallocated. In other words, overspent. They were being given media share allocation beyond the point of diminishing returns. However, the first phase study advocated against immediately shifting out-of-home budgets from what the current allocations are all the way to a fully optimized level. And in the first phase study, which again we released at the end of last year and we did the webinar in January, it recommended incremental increases to out-of-home using a test and learn approach. As you're about to learn, the very exciting part about the second phase analysis revealed that even relatively minor incremental shifts from overspent channels to out-of-home with branch and agencies can really achieve huge amounts of the fully optimized benefits in both sales ROI and brand metric score improvement. So now I'm going to pass our introduction to Karin with a question. Do you have any clients who would like to improve their media plan effectiveness at no additional cost?
Thanks, Steve. And first, hi, everyone. Really great being here today to be taking through those exciting findings. So to answer your question, or let me flip the question, who would not be interested to do more with same budget? Pretty safe to say, I think every brand is looking to do that. And as a voice of the buy side, it's certainly our day-to-day mission to make the dollars work harder, to do better, right? So to echo what Steve, you've just said during the intro, this is exactly what this study is about, is the utilization of the dollars that did not work anymore at the point of diminishing return on all these channels, and put that into out of home and see how that would impact the campaign delivery. And as you've mentioned, the data does say that by doing that, we increase considerably the campaign gains across all KPIs, right? So that in itself, as the first part of this study, was already very powerful, right? And a solution that we are honest with to go to marketers and say, this is how you can basically optimize your campaigns. What I think the second part of the study, looking now how the path to get to that end goal, right, through incrementality, is giving us further ammunitions to engage with that conversation in a more realistic way, because effectively the first study showed us for the full-blown optimization, what were the shift, right? So going from our current 1 to 5% pending categories of out-of-home share to a 10, 15, or 25, right? Again, pending categories, you could achieve this maximum gain. This is great. But again, for marketers to apprehend that shift, it's a big step, right? So what I really love about this study that Benchmarketing is going to take us through in details is showing that just by moving the cursor a little, it does deliver already great results. And that is very tangible. I think that really gives us, again, the rationale to engage in the right conversation and say, these are the first steps of optimizing overall your campaign delivery. So I see this as a great opportunity, very timely indeed, because we are right now, I mean, we know many brands are in the making of their 2025 strategies. So I think we can all grab that material and start engaging with those conversations. So having said that, I'm turning over to Sally and Wanda.
Hello, everyone. Wanda and I say hello from a rainy UK. It's been very rainy all year, it feels like. But one of the bright things in the UK is the state of the out-of-home ad spend market. It's the only offline media channel that is growing. If you include cinema, we're at 11.5% of ad spend, including all the digital, including all paid search. So it's out of home does really well in the UK. We just want the same thing to happen in the US. Maybe we don't go to 11% just yet, but we should definitely be doing more. And the work that Wanda and the team have done absolutely proves this across all of these metrics. So Wanda has got a lot of information to take you through, but you do have all the backup documents. We can always do this again, just to get all of this information through. So over to Wanda.
Okay, yeah, well, thank you for letting us take you through this really interesting analysis. In terms of, we have got some great data to go through today. In terms of how the deck is set up, we'll go straight through to the headline key results. It's always good just to recap what are the key things coming out of this analysis. And Karin and Steve have already touched on those key things coming out. We'll then talk about the analysis journey to date, because this has been a journey. You know, we've been doing this since 2023 now, and the analysis has built up over time to get these really crucial results we'll take you through today. We'll recap on the previous analysis and optimizations, because this part of the study is based on those. So it's really important we remember how we got to those points of and how we did those optimizations to be able to then break them down into incremental steps. And then finally, we'll go into the incremental steps analysis. Okay, so in terms of the headline results, when we do run our optimization, now we've done this analysis across all media channels, we can see in every case that out-of-home budget should be increased, and it increases not only sales revenue, but key brand metric scores. So as well as increasing revenue and key brand metric scores, ROAS also increases when you increase allocation to out-of-home. And we see this for sales, as well as brand awareness, consideration, and purchase intent. Unfortunately, and as has been mentioned, we have seen that out of home has historically significantly been underinvested over time. So hopefully this analysis does provide confidence going forward that we need to increase that investment. It's been too low historically. And then the key thing coming out of this incremental steps analysis is that even with just the initial incremental increase in out of home, we can see a really strong gain in sales and brand metric scores. So again, hopefully these results, it's using hard data, can provide confidence in increasing out of home investment, even slightly can increase some great significant gains. So we'll just talk about the analysis process and journey, because it has been a process to get to here to date. So we started this in 2023 with a range of analysis, and what we really want to do with this analysis is crucial, is to get to these response curves. It's only with response curves can you then optimize media, because you need to know where to spend the next dollar. So we utilized a range of techniques, which I'll come on to a bit more detail in the next slide, but utilizing essentially econometric modeling to be able to build these response curves by channel, so then we can see where the budget should be optimally allocated. And we did this across 3 categories. So it's automotive, CPG food, and retail grocery. And it's really important to do it across different categories, because obviously different categories, brands behave differently within those categories. So these are the 3 categories that we focused the analysis on. We did the analysis to get to the response curves. And then once we had those set of response curves for each category by media channel, we could then optimize. So it's taking the budget for an average brand in those categories, looking at what the current budget was and the current allocation, and then optimizing it. So we're not increasing any budgets or asking advertisers to spend any more money, but just look at the current budget and reallocate to optimize. And what did come out consistently was that out of home was consistently underinvested as a channel within the optimal media budget. So typically we see, out of home levels for automotive, for example, are only 1% of overall media budget. So a very, very low level spent on out of home. And the response curves were telling us this was too little. And if you want to get to optimal, it needs to be increased. But what we did see was the optimal levels of increasing were quite a strong move from those low levels of around 1%. And we always recommend a test and learn or an incremental increase when you're changing your budgets. So that's when we decided to do the incremental steps analysis, which was taking that current level of out of home share, what's the optimal, and then breaking it down into 3 incremental steps to see what's the incremental impact moving through each steps, rather than a jump straight from current to optimal. So just to recap on the analysis we did on the 2023 study and how did we get to that optimal media allocation. And it was all about creating these response curves. We did 2 sets of analysis. We did one for sales analysis and one for brand metrics analysis. And they're both different analysis, but the end result was the same, was to get to these crucial response curves to be able to allocate optimally. So with the sales analysis, we have access to a very comprehensive vault of multiple existing sales marketing mix models. And those marketing mix models are very, very powerful in terms of telling you how media works by media channel. And we could use those MMMs to create these response curves by category, by media channel. So we could utilize those to build our response curves by media channel. And then we could use those, taking the existing budget for an average brand within a category, and then optimize based on those curves. So the curves tell you where the next dollar should be spent, where are the diminishing returns being set in. Like typically you want to be on that response curve. The steepest part is going to be the most efficient. And then as it flattens out, for example, you're getting into diminishing returns. So it's moving money around. So you're not on the inefficient part of the curves where you're seeing diminishing returns, but you're putting it onto channels where you're seeing more effective returns and allocating accordingly. For the brand metric analysis, this is where we actually built new complex econometric marketing mix models for 3 key brand metrics, and they were brand awareness, brand consideration, and brand purchase intent. We utilized Vivek's spend data and brand index brand metric data, and we gathered that data monthly by brand and built these quite clever pooled econometric models, again, to be able to create these response curves. Because we have media data going into them, we were able to then create these crucial response curves by media channel, by category, to be able to allocate what is the optimal spend. We know what the current spend is, but how can we optimize utilizing those response curves? So essentially it's getting these response curves for sales response curves and brand metrics response curves, and utilizing those response curves to get to that optimal budget So the next few charts show the results of those utilising those response curves and getting to the optimal budget allocation. So if we look at the left-hand chart, this is the results for the sales analysis. So the sales results by category. So the left-hand charts, the first two columns are the results for the automotive category. So the first column shows the current budget allocation. So only 1% allocated to out of home. So, a low amount allocated to out of home. But if we run the optimization, we can see actually to optimize for that same budget, you can actually, what you should be doing is increasing that 1% on out of home to 5%. And to do this, you would lower TV slightly, as well as radio, and maybe increase digital slightly. But by doing that, you optimize where you are for automotive. Moving along to CPG food, again, also 1% only allocated to out of home, but with optimal, it's recommending that should be increased to 17% with a reduction in TV and print, but also an increase in radio and a very slight decrease in digital for an optimal allocation. For retail grocery, this is the largest out-of-home allocation in our three categories at 8% for out-of-home. But actually, this should be increased considerably, actually, to 27% if you want to be optimal. And to do that, you need to decrease TV slightly and radio slightly to get to that 27%. And then the chart on the right shows just by taking that same budget and reallocating within those channels, the improvement you can see on your ROAS. So just by moving from 1% to 5% on out of home and a few adjustments on the other channels, we can see a 5% improvement on our ROAS for no change in budget. CPG food, we see a really good increase, 27% by reallocating to the optimal budget allocation. And we see a 6% improvement in ROAS for reallocating our retail grocery spends. So we can do the same now for brand awareness. So again, utilizing our response curves that we built through the analysis. We can see on the chart on the left for automotive, if you want to optimize brand awareness, out of home should be increased from 1% to 19%. TV should be reduced. Radio is also recommended to be increased. So radio also gains in this optimization, and digital decreased slightly. For CPG food, we have 1% again as the current spend for out of home. With an optimal allocation, that should be increased to 11%, with a slight reduction in TV and print, but a bit of an increase in radio. And for retail grocery, the 8% for out of home should be increased to 21%, with a decrease in TV and a slight decrease in digital. But we see really strong gains, again, just from taking that same budget, reallocating for optimal. We can see 19% ROAS improvement for automotive category, 17% for CPG food, and 4% for retail grocery. So great improvements in your ROAS there just by reallocating. If we look at brand consideration, so the left-hand charts again show us what the current allocation is and what the optimal is. So for automotive, moving from 1% to 14% to optimize for out of home and increase radio as well. But to do this, we need to decrease digital and TV. For CPG food, you're moving 1% to 11% for out of home with a decrease in TV, but a bit of an increase in radio, but print needs to be decreased slightly for optimal. And for retail grocery, it's increasing that 8% out of home to 11% with a decrease in TV and digital, but a big increase in radio as well for optimal. And then we can see on the right-hand side, the ROAS improves again for all of three of these categories without any increase in spend. And the ROAS here is based as consideration points per million rather than your sales ROI. You get 11% improvement in automotive, 16% for CPG food, and a 3% improvement for retail grocery. And finally, for our last brand metric, this is purchase intent. So the left-hand chart, we can see our current and our optimize. So for automotive, we're increasing to 13% for out of home from our 1%, decreasing your TV and digital, but increasing radio as well as the out of home. For CPG food, we increase 1% to 15% for out of home, decreasing the TV and print. There's the main changes there. And for retail grocery, it's 8% to 10% with a decrease in digital, but a bit of an increase in print in this category. And then on the right-hand side, again, we can see the improvements in ROAS. And again, improvements across all three categories just by reallocating that same budget. And 19% for automotive, 24% for CPG food, and 9% for retail grocery. So those were the results, the headline results from the main study about what is the optimal allocation by media channel for those 3 categories. But as you can see, some of those increases were quite considerable. So for example, if you look at this table here, the second column in is the current out-of-home level. It's a measly 1% for automotive and CPG food. It's a bit bigger for retail grocery, but the optimal levels recommended, whilst they're optimal, they can be seen as quite a drastic move for advertisers to go straight to that. So some of these, we would talk about increasing 10%, 14% from where they currently are, up to 19% for retail grocery for sales. So that's why we kind of broke it down into the incremental steps analysis, and just making it very, very simple. All we're doing is we're taking the current out of home level and the optimal out of home level, and we're just breaking that down into 3 steps. So pretty much dividing it by 3 equal steps, and just seeing at step 1, step 2, step 3, how does that improve ROAS? Where are we seeing the biggest gains, and how does that look? So that's the analysis we've done for incremental steps analysis, is just breaking it down into 3 very simple steps towards current, towards optimal. So the next few charts, just to warn you, do have quite a lot of data and information on them. These charts are designed to be a takeaway. As Steve mentioned, they are all available to you to download. So I'll go through these relatively slowly with a build and animation, but typically there is a lot of information on these slides, but it can all be digested again at a later date. And typically you might want to just look at these for one category, whereas this slide has all 3 categories on it. So first of all, this slide is taking you through the sales gain, so through the incremental increase of our out-of-home share. So if we look at automotive, so we saw before, just on the previous analysis, that the optimal is moving from the 1% out of home to the 5% out of home. That's the optimal move. But if we break down that 1 to 5% in 3 steps, so we go up 1 to 2% each, in each step, we can see what the gain would be at each step. And if you look at step 1, so you're going from 1% to 2%, so a 1% increase, incremental step, we see a gain of 52.14 million, which is incredible just in step 1. If we go to step 2, so we go from 2% to 4% out of home share, we get an additional 15.62 million. And in the third step, so we go up to the full 5%, we make another 1.48 million. So really, really strong gains, but the majority is seen in that step 1. And if you look at the chart on the right, you can see for that total 69.2 million gain for reallocating your out-of-home share, we see 75% is just in that step 1, 23% is in step 2, and 2% is in step 3. So if we look at CPG food next, so the recommended optimal is 1% to 17%. If we break that down in the middle table to 3 steps, step 1's increasing to 6%, we see a 2.42 gain in sales. The second step goes up to 12%, 0.83 million. And then the third step gets you to that 17%, the optimal level, gets an additional 0.22 million. So again, we see 70%, really the bulk of that gain is seen in that first step, just from moving the first step from 1% to 6%. And then retail grocery, the third category, we go from 8% to the optimal 27%. So it's quite a big jump. But if we break that down into the incremental steps, 3 steps in the middle table, so we go from 8% to 14%, we see 16.04 million gain. The second step is up to 20%, but we see another 7.66 million added. And in the third step, right up to 27, which is the optimal, we see an incremental 2.59 million added. So again, you are gaining with each step, but the biggest gain is seen in that first step. So 61% is seen in that first step, 29% in the second step, and 10% in the third step. So let's do this now for brand awareness. Let's see the impact through the incremental steps of increasing out of home. So we saw for brand awareness that the optimal was increasing from 1% to 19%. If we look at that incrementally and we go step 1, we go from 1 to 7%. And we do this now in points because we're talking about brand metrics. We can get 1.36 points additional just in that first step. The second step, we go up to out of home share of 13%. We see a 0.11 points increase. And then the last step where we go up to that optimal at 19, we see 0.02 points increase. So for brand metrics, actually 91% is seen just in that first step, 8% in the second and 1% in the final step 3, but huge majority in just the first step. For CPG food, the optimal is moving from 1 to 11%. Let's break that 11% down into 3 steps. So we go 1 to 4%, we see a good 1.45 improvement in brand awareness. With the next step at 8%, we see another 0.32 points. And then the third step, 11%, we see 0.08 points gain. So we see 78% here in just the first step. For retail grocery, we move from 8% to 21%. So if we break that down into 3 steps, so in the first step, we go from 8 to 12%, we see 0.32 points increase. In the second step, we go 18%, we see 0.17. And in the third step, we increase to 21%, which is the optimal, we get an additional 0.02. And on your chart on your right shows you that for that total gain, we see 63% in just the first step, another 33% gained in the second, and 4% in the third step. So doing the same for consideration. So we saw for automotive, current needs to increase from 1% to 14%, and breaking that down into the incremental steps, we can see 1% to 5% in the first step generates 1.42%. And if you look at the table on the right, that's 89% of that total gain just achieved in the first step. The second step achieves additional 0.13 and the third 0.03. So another 8 and 2% respectively. For CPG food, we go from 1% to 11% is the optimal, but let's break that down into 3 steps. So the first step, we go 1 to 4% is another additional 2.66%. The second step, the additional 0.58, and the third 0.10. So 79% is just in that first step, 17 in the second step, and 3 in the third step. So again, the reoccurring theme here, as you can see, is that just that first step, you're seeing significant gains, and none so more than the third one for retail grocery, where pretty much the majority of the whole move is seen in step 1. So this is moving from 8 to 11%, so not such a drastic move as some of them above, but just in that first move from the 8 to 9%, you're getting 0.26 points, which is 99% of that gain just from that first move. So purchase intent, so the final brand metric. So for automotive, it's recommended moving 1 to 13% for optimal. So if we break that down into three stages, the first step is 1 to 5%, and we get 1.09 points of additional purchase intent points. Step 2, going up to 9%, we get another 0.04 points. And the third step, 13%, we don't see so much, we get 0.006 points. So 96%. So for purchase intent, the majority really is seen in the first step for this category in automotive. For CPG food, it's moving from 1% to 15% optimal. Breaking it down into the 3 steps, we go from 5 to 10 to 15% share, and the chart on the right shows you can get 72% of that gain, or 0.73 points in just the first step, 23% in the second step, and 5% in the third step. And then for retail grocery, we're moving from 8 to 10%, so not such a big jump here. So we've just broken it down into 2 steps, so from 8 to 9% to 10%, but the vast majority is seen in just that first percent, just that extra 1% increase. We see 97% or 0.22 additional points of purchase intent for retail grocery. And then if we look at these across all the categories, and we've just seen in that chart, it's all about that first step. You've seen such significant gains just with moving that first step. And I think I prefer this next chart, which just shows you the percentage gain in just the first step. And as you can see, they're all considerable. They range from 60% right up to nearly 99% achieved in step 1. So hopefully this should provide quite confident results to show just turning the dial a bit on out of home and increasing it just in the first incremental step is just seeing significant gains in terms of both sales and brand metric improvements. So that's kind of the key results of the incremental steps analysis. Back to the key findings, just to make sure these kind of really are kind of resonating. It's showing that with the optimal budget allocations, out-of-home budget should be increased to increase both sales revenue and key brand metric scores. We see increases in ROAS across sales and all of our brand metrics that we've modelled. We've seen that out-of-home has been historically significantly underinvested. And hopefully this analysis provides confidence to change that going forward, that even with just a small increase or an incremental increase in out of home, we can see significant gains. So thank you for letting me take you through that. But before I go, I just want to just note there are some brilliant slides and information also included in the appendices on all the documents that have been uploaded. So please do kind of scoot through there. I've got a couple of examples. If you don't want to have all the graphics and the charts, there's some simple tables in the background that just show you the step-by-step, the increases in the out-of-home allocation, the increases in the income, the percentage step gained and by category. So there's all charts like this in the appendix, as well as things like out-of-home spend ranges. It's really interesting to know what were the spend ranges looked at in the analysis. And we did go on, we didn't just look at the average brand, we also looked at what were the small brands, medium brands, and large brands, and how did their spend range change accordingly. So for automotive, for example, we've got a spend range from 0.58 million up to 6.53 million for kind of current spend ranges. But if you're optimizing that, it's recommended that should actually be between 5.01 million and 18.16 million if you're optimizing. So just to kind of note, there are a lot of charts in the appendix that are worth a look too. So yeah, thank you for letting me take you through that.
Thank you, Vanda. That was excellent. And I do want to reinforce with everyone, there is a summary report on our website, which hits the highlights of similar to what you've just seen. But if you want to take a deeper dive, then there are two full, pretty data-intensive reports, both for the sales ROI, ROAS, and also the brand metrics that you can really take a deep dive through. We've got some questions, and please go ahead and send those in if you have more. But the first one, actually, first I just want to give a quick shout out to Medina Barham, who is also on the benchmarking team and did a lot of work on this. So really appreciate that. Let's see. So the first question that we have, I'm going to turn this over. Actually, Karin, I think this is the best one for you. In the context of the buy-side audience, what's the best way to utilize this analysis?
Sure. So I think what I really like about this report, it's adaptability, if that's even a word, but I'm going to make it a word just for today, in the sense that I can see this as almost a Lego toolbox, right? So I'm a core believer of you need to adapt your message depending on the audience you're dealing with. So in our world, I'm thinking of utilizing these materials differently, depending the key stakeholders that we want to plan that message with, right? So you've just talked about the executive summary, Steve. This is an amazing piece, easy to take, or the two top 2-3 slides, summary slides in this deck, and send that to the exec level marketers, account leads to really talk about holistically the results. The second kind of community group that would then want to get the full dive into the data details is obviously the data scientists, right? The analytics people. In our world on the buy side, many of these people are pivotal to define the approach to media strategies, media mix strategies. So it's essential to reach out to them speaking their language, and all the materials is really their language, right? And to address with them and engage in that conversations to understand how out-of-home has been until now incorporated, if it has, and basically utilize again that data point to plan those considerations, right? And say whatever tool has been used, whatever model, is it utilizing MMM model, or to challenge the current status on how out-of-home has been incorporated. And again, making sure that one of the key insights that we've learned from this study, that out-of-home works across all KPIs. This is really taking into account into the planning phase and approach that have been defined, right? So that's another line of communication. And thirdly, I would think of category specific, obviously, right? So these materials can be dive and diced to be very geared to who you're talking to in terms of the category. And one that just also showed this slide where you see depending on the size of your budget, right? So I think this gives lots of opportunities for everyone, for our teams to basically say, okay, I'm speaking to this client. I'm going to be very resonating with them because they are actually a small spender, but they could still do more. Their dollars could work better. So I'm going to look at the deck and take exactly what I need, talking to either the exact category they're in or the one that is the closest, right? And utilize that to craft a story that will resonate with them. So I see this, yes, again, as a kind of Lego box where you can create your own message, depending on who you're speaking with.
Thanks, Karin. And I want to emphasize, I think, a really critical point, and you touched on this before we got into the actual presentation, is that the incrementality, again, to go in and say a buyer needs to shift out of home allocation from 5 to 27%. That's not a realistic conversation. And so the beauty of this study is that, again, really educating them on the fact that these, relatively minor shifts can achieve most of the optimization gains. So it's really a gateway study for us to get in and have much more serious conversations. And then once out-of-home allocations start to build over time, I think, the results of these studies will show that then even maybe perhaps more should be invested in out-of-home. So it's a really great gateway study for us. This next one, Sally, I think you're probably best equipped to handle this. In addition to the sales ROI revenue growth and increased percentage that we saw, does the analysis quantify baseline sales data from which the growth was produced?
So for our sales models, we just have the response curves. We don't have the detail on the base level and how much of the overall sales was driven by media, because we didn't build the database that this came from. If we had built it, we would, in the UK, we'd have put those factors in and gathered those. For the brand awareness models, we have all of those. Each of those models, we could show you a decomposition of how much is due to media, how much within that is due to out of home, and what the base level is. And one thing that Vanda didn't show you, because it would blow your mind, would be that we didn't just do this for CPG food. We did it for small brands versus medium brands versus large brands. And you've got the different elements there. And it's large brands in terms of, I believe it's the size of the brand, the sales of the brand, not the size of the media spend. So there's more detail on that we can look at. It's a really good point, because we know, for instance, that in retail grocery, there's very, very many different factors that drive sales in there, and there is a kind of sliver of media effect on the top. But the category is so large, the brands are so large, that media sliver of color, and within that the out of home, is generating billions of dollars. It's in areas like CPG food, where the brands are generally relatively small, and they also have lower gross margins that you're seeing the smaller returns and such like to be able to do that. So there's loads of stuff that we can explore within this, and because we built those brand models, we can actually explore individual ones of those to be able to look at, as I said, the small, medium, and large.
Thanks, Sally. There was another question that just came in, and it was about the appendix data and where you can access that, and that is in the full reports. And also there's some appendix data in the summary report too. So again, downloading all those. And if you go to our homepage and you click on Resource Center, go down to Marketing Research and click on that drop down, it'll be the first study that comes up, and you'll be able to access all the assets right there. Karin, I've got another one for you next. How do we best, and I think obviously you're the person to take this one, how do we best communicate the benefits of adding out of home to planning teams in an impactful way? And what process steps do you recommend to actually create share shift for us in the future?
Not a small task, definitely what we're after. So MMM is, of course, a foundational piece to that, right? And that study again tells us two key elements. The first is put dollars to out-of-home, your campaign will deliver more. The second, again, going about it will deliver more across all KPIs. And that second point for me is really a fight, a challenge that we are constantly faced with, which is this legacy perception of out-of-home, addressing only upper funnel, the big awareness splash, without understanding that actually out-of-home delivers across all KPIs. And I think it's on all of us collectively to be more systemic in the way we talk about out-of-home. So again, talking on our end on the buy side, we're still very often briefed in a still unfortunately very tactical way, right? So out-of-home, cover these geographies, proximity-based, we want this big splash, right? I think it's on us to, again, challenge this and basically ask, what is the KPI that this campaign is to achieve? By posing the question, by speaking that language, that implies, again, that there is not just one, there is, you know, a whole spectrum that out-of-home can address. And it's really speaking the language of, you know, taking out-of-home at parity with the other channels. So it's talking KPI, talking audiences. Obviously, I keep hammering that, but that's essential because, again, that is addressing the fact that out-of-home has completely evolved in the way it's being bought, that we can refine based on audiences, optimize CPM, and that way integrate out-of-home in a much better way in the mix, rather than having it as a siloed piece, again, just for big splash, right, coverage. So these things, and the third thing I will say, and so everyone picked on my accent, I'm sure. I spent the first half of my career working in countries, and Wanda and Sally will know that, in European countries where the share of out-of-home is basically flirting with the 10% or above. And the key difference that I see still is national, right? So in those countries, out-of-home is bought on a national basis. In the US, we are still, again, being constrained by certain geographies. And I think it's on us to constantly challenge these things. And by challenging this in a more systemic way, we're going to start, again, addressing the misconception that out-of-home can only do that and be this. It can do far more than that. And today, the data proves it. The data shows it. So.
Excellent perspective, Karin. I think really important. And part of that systemic conversation actually goes back to some work that I mentioned earlier today, and that was the best practices that we developed for marketing mix modeling and also out-of-home attribution. And Diksha shared with everyone in the chat the link to the current study and all the different presentations and the infographics and the white paper and the Q&A. But she's also going to share a link to where you can find those best practices documents. And if you go to the Resource Center and then you click on let's see, you go to, let's see, I want to make sure I get this correct, guidelines and standards. And then if you go into the business guidelines section within that, then that's where you can access all those best practices documents that we created, such as the MMM best practices, the out-of-home attribution best practices. There's also a glossary and a Q&A and white papers too. So a lot of helpful tools there. Sally, I've got another question for you here. Can we connect factors like media plan weight, flight length, formats, mix to performance expectations based on this analysis?
for that sort of information, I really think you need a very detailed MMM on individual brands, and also to be able to do things to do with flighting, you need weekly data. So we are lucky in the UK that we get almost all of our media channel data. We can get that weekly, to be able to then model weekly sales, brand index data and such like, to be able to look against that. You're getting into a lot of detail, where our sort of analysis is really good at doing at a fairly kind of high level. So I don't want to overpromise, but I would love to potentially, on the brand index measures, we could in a future iteration, we could start to look at the difference between digital out of home and traditional out of home. Probably not into sizes and formats and such like, maybe into the kind of whether it is in transit stations versus others. You can do a couple of splits on these things, but the data starts to become highly correlated with itself, so you can't get a good answer for everything, but it's always, I think it's always worth exploring these things. But yeah, throughout the world, the data is never quite good enough, the explanatory data that you're dealing with, because you need to do this for not just your brand, where you might have good data to do an MMM, but also to have competitor data on the same basis. We really struggle to evaluate many different sorts of digital activity because no one's reporting the digital activity. It's all behind walled gardens and such like. So yeah, it's a constant battle for us to get that good data.
It's all about the inputs, right? That actually, just to kind of, build off of that, there was another question about, did the study give consideration out of home formats? And as Sally just alluded to, a lot of the findings were constrained about what available inputs we had. And with the Vivix data, there is some reporting to them by out-of-home companies by format, but it's not consistent across all the different categories. And so for us to do that, we really needed consistent reporting across the board. And again, hopefully that's something that we can build towards. But a really important finding in those best practices that we did was the discovery that in a lot of existing marketing mix modeling, they are not looking at out-of-home by format. They're just looking at it as a single line item. And to really understand the performance of out-of-home, you really have to, in addition to look at weekly data like Sally just shared, you also need to look at out-of-home format, because if you're deploying a number of out-of-home formats, you need to understand how those are all working individually. So that was one of the major findings in the best practices, is models need to incorporate out-of-home format. And then we also need to be reporting that way so that data is out there that we can incorporate in future work. Let's see. Oh, and I just want to clarify with everybody, all the findings in the study are all based on US data. So it's all US fueled information and data. Let's see, Karin, I've got another one for you. In the automotive category, for the sales ROI, the incremental step to attain most of the optimized gain only takes out of home from a 1% allocation to a 2% allocation. Is this the right messaging for our industry?
I think it is. I think it is because, again, and you've mentioned it, Steve, we need to be realistic about those shifts, right? So this is the first step, and we're not saying we will not ultimately try to go for the maximum optimized share, right? But the first step, and this proves that the first steps already delivers great. So that makes it more realistic to convince and to make that upsell. Again, not to say that this will close the door and that's it. It's a door opener to then consider the effectiveness of out-of-home. So I don't have the exact numbers, but let's say the first step is going to deliver up to 75%. Great. Who will not want still to go for the extra 25%? We all want to go for the extra value. So that is not at all closing the door. It just makes it more realistic to engage with those conversations with these brands to say, consider this. This model basically shows that this is what we could deliver. Let's already move that cursor to that, right?
Great, thank you. Another quick question about the recording. If you go to our homepage under news and events, there's a drop down to our webinars and masterclasses, and that's where we'll be posting today's recording later this afternoon. Let's see, a couple of other questions here. Will we be running similar studies with other categories? That's to be determined. We want to get a sense about from our members how, the value that they found from the study. We think it's terribly valuable, but also want to get, feedback and response from you all and see if it's helping move the needle in the marketplace. So we'll hope to be able to do that in the future and add more categories, but that's to be determined right now. Sally, I have another question for you. This is pretty data focused. Are these ROAS improvements with increased budget allocation theoretically modeled, or are there proofs of these?
Yeah, that's a slightly difficult question. So we have built these models. We have those models. We could show someone each of those models that we have by brand within the categories for, say, brand awareness. Those models give us a set of response curves. The response curves are the results of the model, and then those response curves, we use those to optimize to then say, this is the point, this is how you would change your mix to get the better improvement in overall return on investment. So I'm going to go into a little bit of maths right now. So when you have a set of curves, say one for TV, one for print, one for radio, one for out of home, one for digital, what you're trying to do when you optimize is try to make the point on the curve that is the best position is where all the gradients of the curve of the individual curves are the same. So typically we see a TV curve that is going flat, whereas we're seeing that out of home, if you look at that curve, we've got the evidence at the lower part of the curve, where I would, in UK terms, I'd say it's really perky, it's really pointing upwards. What we're trying to do is say move out of home up, move TV down, maybe move radio up to a point where the gradient of each of the channel curves is the same. So you can play with this on the kind of sliding scale in one of our tools. In theory, there is, if you can differentiate negative exponential functions, you can do it that way, or you do it with a kind of hill climbing algorithm, a little bit of machine learning within a tool. But that's what we've done. We've just applied to get the same gradient on each of those, and that is saying, okay, so on automotive, where we're moving from 1 to 5%. Then that is the best possible place to be to get overall, not out of home, but overall ROI optimized.
Great. And then another question, and I'm going to take this one. Do you have any information about which types of media advertisers tend to pair with out of home? I'm not really sure if that question is about other channels or about the specific advertising brands, but we've done a lot of work, and this study certainly, underscores the fact that out of home is a great amplifier for any media investment, and that's because our massive reach, and then number two, it's typically, in most of its forms, always on. You don't have to tune on. You can't skip it. You really can't block it. So we have that massive reach that really very few media do anymore. And most other channels are really constrained by audience fragmentation with the explosion of the digital age. And that's not really a hurdle that we have in the out-of-home world. Sal, I'm going to put you back on the spot here. Can we extrapolate the same percentages across different total media spend budgets? Meaning, can a client who spends $1 million a year on auto advertising versus a client who spends 10 million, can they see the same increases with that same reallocation percentages?
I think to be completely safe, we'd look at our small, medium, large categories to be able to do that. I think the answer is broadly yes, but it depends on the size of the brand as much as how much they spend. So think about the advertising to sales ratio. If that is the same, I would expect the same sort of uplift. But yeah, we could do a little bit more exploration on that if you want to discuss that.
Great. And Karin, I'm going to throw this one at you because it really is about the buy side and that whole agency communication process. Econometric modeling is not that new. Why do you feel this information isn't already being actioned by media agencies that are allocating marketing dollars? It's a careful blend of informing agencies, but not telling them how to do their job.
So, unfortunately, so yes, the MMM has been around for very long, right? This is not new in the approach. The findings are, though, very insightful. And again, it's about fighting or challenging the legacy perception of how out-of-home is perceived, right? So we've alluded to it before. We are still dealing in some instances where MMMs are run on some clients and out-of-home is not even part of the MMM. And we've talked about that as well, we are asked to report on data for out-of-home for the MMM, but without any context, and we provide data in a very aggregated level that basically ultimately is it's not gonna have the results, and the results will show poorly. So it's all these things. MMM has been around, it's still in use. We are not teaching anyone how to do their job by any means. We are just coming with a new study that has been looking at neutrally the entire media mix and optimize on these things. So I think it's how we basically position that messaging. It's just by saying, would you have those considerations? Let's consider this, right? Because against those three major categories, right? Utilizing all the intel that Benchmarketing has. And again, when you go through all the materials and they take us through how they've come up with these, they've used tons of data, right? So this cannot be challenged. This is really solid data to basically say, when you look at this, it delivers better by integrating more out-of-home. Let's engage in a conversation, right? I think we can use that as a door opener. It's not the truth. It's a door opener. Let's engage in that conversation. Let's plant the seed to say, have those considerations.
I love your focus on the conversation. I mean, I think that's really what it's all about, is ongoing education. And just quickly, marketing mix modeling was super popular for a long time. And then when attribution came on the scene, a lot of people seemed to flee across the field all the way over to attribution, and they kind of really, MMM was almost diminished for a while, but there's been a swing back, and MMM is much more involved in a lot of conversations these days and part of analysis and focus again. So, and I think even some people are relying on it more than they are attribution, but it's a combination. And again, I think with the best practices, with the study and so on, it's all about education and communication. And I know in the years that I did the agency roadshow program, was out talking to agencies and educating them on the value of out-of-home, I found them really receptive to education. It's a little bit of helping them with their homework. And so it is all about how you present the data and you know, the conversation. But I think most agencies are really receptive, and they find it helpful to get information and insights. So, and then just one other quick question. I know we need to wrap up here. How did you decide which media to lower to increase the out-of-home allocation? And again, as Sally already touched on and Vonda did in the presentation, again, they were looking at the curves and looking at, once media reached a point of optimization, what other media were not yet optimized. And so it's moving those around to make sure that the overall plan is fully optimized. So again, looking at channels that were overspent, that were beyond the point of diminishing returns. And you'll find in this study, actually, I think Karin referenced this earlier, there were some examples where radio allocation was increased. But primarily what the study found was print really was not very effective in terms of generating results. And then what was typically overspent, again, was digital and TV. So that wraps up our questions. I'd just like to remind everybody again that the summary presentations are available. You can click on the link in the chat. I think, again, it's great to look at those business guidelines section where you can find the best practices. And again, with all the, you can find not only all the full reports, but we do have those supporting infographics, summary white paper of the study, and then the Q&A documents. So I think those are all really helpful tools. This is not a simple subject to understand. So we built a lot of different resources to help you summarize and understand the information. And then again, we'll have a recording of today's webinar up on the site later this afternoon. So thank you again for joining us today. I hope you found it informative and have a great afternoon. Thank you, Vonda, Sally, and Karin. So appreciate it.
Thanks, everyone.
Please take a minute to fill out the survey too, folks. Really appreciate it. Thank you.